There was something about Robert Mitchum. That drawling voice, the effortless swagger, the sleepy eyes that looked like they'd seen everything and judged nothing. He wasn't trying to be cool. He was cool. A staple of film noir in the 1940s, Mitchum made cynicism magnetic. But even he couldn't dodge the headlines forever. In 1948, Mitchum was arrested in a late-night police raid at a private party in Los Angeles. The charge? Possession of marijuana. At the time, it was a career killer. Studios panicked, and the public wasn't used to seeing their silver screen heroes in a police lineup. But Mitchum didn't flinch. He famously said, "It was just that the dogs were on the wrong scent. If they'd followed me home, they would have found a kilo of heroin under the bed." It was sarcasm, of course, but the line stuck, because it was so Mitchum. He served 60 days in jail, emerging with his stardom not just intact, but amplified. He had become the reluctant rebel, the man who didn't grovel or explain. Hollywood didn't know it yet, but Mitchum had just invented a prototype of modern masculinity. Flawed, unrepentant, and strangely irresistible. And here's the kicker. Years later, the conviction was overturned, expunged from his record. But by then, it didn't matter. Mitchum had already won, not just over the courts, but over the court of public opinion. His story was no longer about a conviction. It was about survival and style in the face of scandal. Barbara Payton, a bombshell burned by the spotlight. Barbara Payton didn't walk into Hollywood, yet she exploded onto the scene. With icy blonde hair, smoky eyes, and a magnetism that seemed almost dangerous, she was everything the studios wanted. For a while, it looked like she would become the next great leading lady. But fame, as always, demanded something in return. Her descent began not on screen, but in her private life. Barbara got caught in one of Hollywood's ugliest love triangles. Between actors Tom Neal, a former boxer with a mean streak, and Franchot Tone, a sophisticated star known for his elegance. The rivalry turned violent when Neal assaulted Tone, beating him so badly he was hospitalized with a smashed cheekbone and broken nose. The tabloids had a field day, and Barbara's name was suddenly synonymous with scandal. But the chaos didn't end there. As her roles dried up, Barbara's behavior became more erratic. She was arrested for writing bad checks, often drunk in public. And by the mid-1950s, the glamorous starlet was posing for mugshots instead of movie posters. There's one particularly heartbreaking image of her. Haggard, makeup smudged, eyes hollow, a stark contrast to the studio headshots that once dazzled America. Barbara's fall wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a case study in how Hollywood chews up women it once adored. There were no interventions, no PR cleanups. She was simply discarded. By the time she died in 1967, at just 39 years old, she was broke, alone, and nearly forgotten. But maybe that's why her story still haunts people. Because behind every tabloid headline was a woman who once had the world at her feet and lost it all. Walter Wanger. Walter Wanger wasn't some fringe figure in Hollywood. He was one of its most respected producers. Films like Stagecoach and Cleopatra had his fingerprints all over them. He was known for taking creative risks, for backing bold projects, and for being one of the few producers with a genuine artistic sensibility. But in December 1951, he stepped into a role he never expected. That of a man consumed by jealousy. Wanger suspected his wife, actress Joan Bennett, was having an affair with her agent, Jennings Lang. Whispers had been swirling, and whether or not there was truth to them hardly mattered. That night, as Lang walked through a studio parking lot, Wanger confronted him, pulled out a pistol, and shot him in the thigh and groin. Lang survived. The press exploded. Wanger was arrested on the spot and charged with attempted murder. But then came the twist. His legal team argued that he had suffered a moment of temporary insanity, not uncommon in a town built on heightened emotions and fragile egos. It worked. Wanger served just 4 months in jail. But Hollywood doesn't forget that kind of scandal. Though he returned to producing, he was never quite the same. His projects lost their sparkle. And Joan Bennett? Her career never fully recovered either. She stood by him publicly, but the damage was done. In hindsight, Wanger's story wasn't just about a crime of passion. It was about a man who reached the limits of control in a city built on illusion. The gunfire that night wasn't just a reaction. It was a rupture, a break in the polished veneer of golden-era Hollywood. Frances Farmer, the starlet who fought the system and paid the price. Frances Farmer didn't just act, she burned on screen. In the 1930s, she was poised to become one of Hollywood's most formidable talents. Intelligent, strikingly beautiful, and fiercely independent, she was never the kind of woman to smile on command or play nice for the studio heads. And that's where the trouble began. Frances pushed back against the system. She refused certain roles, she questioned authority, she challenged the hypocrisy of a town that demanded perfection while hiding its own rottenness. But for a woman in that era, especially one unwilling to be molded, rebellion had consequences. After several run-ins with the law, most notably for driving under the influence and public outbursts, she was eventually institutionalized. That's when her life turned into something darker than any role she ever played. She underwent brutal psychiatric treatments, including electroshock therapy, and, according to some sources, even a lobotomy, though that remains unconfirmed and hotly debated. Years later, when she tried to return to the public eye, the industry had moved on. Her name had become a cautionary tale, or worse, a punchline, but beneath the rumors and misdiagnoses was a woman who was simply too modern for her time. She was angry, brilliant, emotionally raw, and unforgivably outspoken. Today, Frances Farmer is often remembered as a tragic figure, but maybe she was something else entirely. A rebel ahead of her time, a woman who refused to shrink for the comfort of others. And for that, she was punished. Paul Kelly, the conviction, the comeback, and the marriage that shocked Hollywood. Paul Kelly looked like the kind of man you'd want to root for. Clean-cut, classically handsome, with the air of a romantic lead, and for much of the 1920s and 30s, that's exactly what he was. But behind the scenes, Paul was entangled in a love story that would end in violence and scandal. He was romantically involved with actress Dorothy McKay, who, at the time, was married to fellow actor Ray Raymond. Tensions between the two men had been simmering for months when one night, it finally boiled over. Paul confronted Ray, and the fight turned physical. Ray didn't survive. Kelly was arrested and charged with manslaughter. It wasn't just a headline, it was a Hollywood earthquake. A leading man sent to prison? That kind of thing didn't happen. He served 2 years in San Quentin, and for most actors, that would have been the end of the story. But not Paul. After his release, Kelly did the unthinkable. He married Dorothy McKay, the widow of the man he'd killed. Their marriage stunned the public. Was it love? Guilt? A way to start over? Nobody really knew. But what made Paul's story even more surreal was that he actually resumed his acting career. And not just small parts. He went on to win a Tony Award as if he'd left the scandal behind him. His life was a strange contradiction. A man who committed a crime, served his time, and somehow managed to rewrite the narrative. In Hollywood, where image is everything, Paul Kelly became proof that even a shattered one can sometimes be reassembled. Marie McDonald, the body that Hollywood couldn't save. They called her the Body. Marie McDonald was the embodiment of 1940s pinup perfection. All curves, charisma, and camera-ready confidence. But beneath the glitz, her life was unraveling. Fast. She wasn't just a pretty face. Marie had real talent. But she was also deeply troubled. Her off-screen life was filled with turbulence. Multiple arrests for check fraud and theft, failed marriages, and endless tabloid drama. She was always trying to hold on to something. Fame, love, identity, and it always seemed to slip through her fingers. Then came the story that pushed her into infamy. In 1957, Marie claimed she had been kidnapped, snatched from her home by 2 strange men, and held for hours before being mysteriously released. The media ate it up. But the police? They weren't convinced. Her story changed, and soon, rumors circulated that the whole thing had been staged. A desperate attempt to regain public attention. Whether it happened or not, the damage was done. The industry, already wary of her volatility, kept its distance. She continued to act occasionally, but the spotlight never shined the same way again. And in 1965, Marie was found dead of a drug overdose at just 42 years old. Her story is often told with a smirk, another fallen starlet narrative. But beneath that label was a woman constantly trying to stay relevant in an industry that prizes youth and beauty above all else. Marie McDonald didn't just fade. She was pushed to the margins by the very machine that once celebrated her. Mabel Normand, the comedian caught in a true crime web. Before Lucille Ball, there was Mabel Normand, a trailblazing comedian with impeccable timing and a fearless spirit. She lit up silent screens and worked alongside icons like Charlie Chaplin and Fatty Arbuckle. But as her star rose, so did the scandals swirling around her. In 1922, Mabel's name was linked to the unsolved murder of director William Desmond Taylor. Though never charged, her close ties to the victim made her a person of interest. Just 2 years later, her chauffeur was involved in a deadly brawl. Again, Mabel wasn't directly to blame, but her reputation took another hit. By the end of the decade, with her health deteriorating from tuberculosis, she quietly stepped away from the spotlight. Mabel's story is one of pioneering brilliance and the high cost of being a woman at the center of chaos. Ted Healey. Before the Three Stooges were a household name, there was Ted Healey, the chaotic, brilliant force who created them. On stage, he was a genius of slapstick. Offstage, though, he was volatile, self-destructive, and deeply troubled. In 1937, Healey died suddenly after a night out in Hollywood. Officially, the cause was complications from alcoholism, but rumors swirled that he'd gotten into a brawl with rising stars, that powerful names had something to hide. The truth remains murky. What's clear is that his relationships, especially with the Stooges he once controlled with an iron fist, were strained and often abusive. Ted's legacy is wrapped in laughter, yes, but also in shadows. A reminder that even comedy's brightest sparks can come from the darkest places.